Welcome back to another segment of License to Legacy. I'm host Javi Trujillo, and joining me once again is Bill Koenig of the Spy Command. How are you today, Bill?
I'm doing okay, Javi.
And of course, we also have Mr. David Leigh from the James Bond dossier here as well. How do you do, David?
I am doing well. What about yourself?
I'm doing okay. It's been
That's
a bit of a
good.
busy morning, but I'm happy to talk some Bond with you, gentlemen. Before we get into today's subject, which would be the 60th anniversary of Goldfinger, we had some breaking news this week. The Hollywood Reporter has an article that Mary Saltzman, the daughter of James Bond producer Harry Saltzman, has passed away at the age of 77. In addition to being on set when Dr. No was filmed, the article mentions how she played Among the Trees at GoldenEye with Sean Connery and Ursula Andress. She was also trying to make a Bond musical. I can't even picture how that would have been, but she had secured the rights to a stage project that she was calling James Bond the Musical. It was a parody that was designed to open in Las Vegas or Broadway, but never made it. Bill, were you familiar with this story at all?
Yes, I was. First of all, a lot of people didn't even know about Mary Saltzman. And I attribute that in the late 90s, they did all these DVD extras, home video extras, and they were like making of the films. And so, like, Stephen Saltzman and Hilary Saltzman were visible in some, but you never saw Mary. And Mary Saltzman was Harry Saltzman's daughter by his first wife, and Hillary and Stephen were from a later marriage. Jackie or Jacqueline, her name, JAQ. That's where the Jack of Danjak comes from. DAN was Dana Broccoli. Anyway, in 2011, I did a post for the Spy Command, which had a different name then. And it was like on the 50th anniversary, will Harry Saltzman be the forgotten man? And then one day, in the comment section, I see this comment, very brief comment from Mary Saltzman. I'm like, what? Who's this? It had the unusual spelling of, Mary as in Merry Christmas. I didn't think any more of it, but like, huh. But she made I should have brought it up. Yeah, she was talking about like her father had been silenced as she had been silenced, or something like that. It was this kind of enigma of a response, and then it was in 2015 that this James Bond musical thing came up. And, what I was going to say was that MGM and Danjak put out a statement. Well, we haven't signed on to this project. Whatever right she has, we haven't given them. And then she said, "Oh, well, it's a parody. I don't need their approval because fair use parody is an example of fair use." So, well, anyway, nothing more ever came of that stage musical. And what it reminded me of when I read it the first time, 1965, Mad Magazine did a parody of a James Bond stage musical where all the songs were sung to songs from the musical Oklahoma. And so it's like Bond comes into the office, I must kill someone today, stuff like that. So if you want to see how a Bond musical might work, dig out a copy of that Mad Magazine parody. Because I thought it was weird at the time, and when I saw the obituary, it was it's like I was reminded about all that.
Yeah, I don't think Barbara Broccoli was very happy at the time.
No, because usually something comes along like in a tabloid, they just stay quiet. But they actually went to the trouble of putting out a statement.
Yeah. No, I remember it. I remember it. Not well, but I remember it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't have any recollection at all. I mean, I'm definitely familiar with her brother Stephen from the various special features, and he's made a few appearances at different Bond events.
Yeah, I met him at the Thunderball 40th in London, which MI6 HQ were involved with the organization. So, yeah, he does get around a bit, yeah.
Well, and Steven Saltzman has a job where he promotes Monaco as a place to invest. Here in the States, there's a weekly news magazine, 60 Minutes, and a year, maybe two ago, they did something about Monaco, and Steven Saltzman was one of the people they interviewed. So he was on 60 Minutes singing the praises of Monaco's tax haven status.
Yeah, well, I do remember when I met him, he was just about to leave for the airport because he was flying home to Monaco.
And of course, Hillary Saltzman, his sister, passed away. I don't know how many years ago now.
2019.
Okay, yeah.
The article says that her brother Christopher died in 1991 and Hillary was 2019. And then, of course, Harry passed away in 94 from a heart attack at the age of 78 during a visit to Paris.
Yeah, because Harry Saltzman and Terrence Young died within a short amount of time of one another. Anyway.
Yeah, I wasn't familiar with the musical, but I mean, she does because of her father, and she did spend time on those very early movies. And so we wanted to just make a note of her passing. But the main gist of the show is to talk about Goldfinger, which, as we stated at the top, it is the 60th anniversary. And there's been a lot of different things that have popped up over the last 2 months regarding Goldfinger, special events and merchandise. So we're going to wind back the clock a little bit and look at the legacy it's had on the Bond fandom. First off, when did you first see it, David?
I first saw it, it must have been about 1976, 1977 when it first aired on British TV. Anybody who is my age and brought up in the UK would have been very, very, very familiar with watching the Bond films on ITV. They started off in 75 with Dr. No, obviously. Then I think it was every 6 months they would show a new one. And so, there's a whole... My generation basically was brought up on Bond on the box, and so it was then. And in fact, I have never seen it on the big screen.
Really?
Yeah, well, it's one of the things about living in Spain. There aren't so many opportunities to see old Bond films on the big screen, especially if you want to see them in English. And so the opportunities never come up for me, so I still haven't seen it.
How about you, Bill? When was your first experience with the film?
I didn't get to see it until 1972, and that was the year it became the first Bond film to be shown on American television. But that summer, United Artists, when it apparently squeezed the last dime they could, had a triple feature at drive-ins of the first three movies. And the Goldfinger print was pretty beat up because that this drive-in was showing, because you're in the middle of the title sequence, and then all of a sudden cut to Bond at the pool of the hotel, or what's supposed to be the pool of the hotel. And you're just, there's, you miss out, the end, you don't see all the end titles. You don't see that opening shot of the hotel in Miami. You don't see Felix at all. You're just bam. And there were that was the worst part. But yeah, the picture quality wasn't so great. So then it appeared on the ABC Sunday Night Movie in September of that year. And all throughout the summer, they had been promoting the heck out of it. Here are the movies, they're going to be on ABC this coming season. And, Goldfinger was the prime example. So, and then I did get a chance to see better prints of it later. When I was in college, it would have been the first semester of my sophomore year, they were showing the first 9 Bond films. And like I said, the print was better. Over the years, I've had chances to see it, in a theater setting, not a major theater, like, that shows first run movies, but, with an audience and projected. So yeah, there were double features that were released, but for some reason I didn't get around to seeing them. I saw other Bond double features, but for some reason I didn't see one with Goldfinger until 72.
The DVDs and Blu-rays have trailers that have that Dr. No and Goldfinger double feature, but I guess you didn't catch one of those.
No, not that one. No.
I would have seen it on, beta or VHS in the 80s for the first time. I don't really have any strong recollections of when that would have been. But I did, in my early 20s, catch it at the University of Arizona, had a theater on campus called the Gallagher. And one day they had a double feature of Moonraker followed by Goldfinger. So I went with my best friend and we caught those. And I remember the Moonraker print was pretty atrocious. Goldfinger looked a lot better. But like the aspect ratios caught me off guard too, because it was more of that traditional. I forget what the ratio is. It's not 185 to 1, but it's more square. Is it
Yeah,
164?
it's more square because when
That's how it
Goldfinger's
was.
on television, you can see with the gun barrel, you can actually see the dot open up and Bond's in it. Whereupon on the more widescreen ones, unless they're specifically shown in widescreen format, sometimes the camera has to pan with the with the dot when it becomes the gun barrel to be able to see it. I thought one other thing. I also saw it in 1994, and they had the first of two official James Bond conventions. The series was gearing up after that long hiatus, and they had hired a company that did a lot of Star Trek conventions. So I guess technically this wasn't part of the convention, but the night before they had a showing at the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. They said it was a new print. And in the audience, in fact, were Peter Hunt and John Steers, the special effects guy. And so when the titles were playing and their title cards came up, there was polite applause from the audience. And, both were speakers at the convention the next day.
So, Bill, how often do you rewatch the film?
Not so much in recent years, probably because I'd seen it so many times. I don't really go to it that often because I've seen it so many times. 5 years ago, for the 55th anniversary, someone suggested doing a kind of live tweeting a showing that was on a channel with commercials. After I did catch a few few things that had passed, that had escaped me, but not many.
What about you, David?
What was the question?
How many times do you rewatch Goldfinger? I know you prefer Thunderball more, but does Goldfinger
Yeah.
get a lot of play in your house?
No, I, to be honest, I don't watch Bond films all that often anymore because I've watched them so much, and I've also watched them frame by frame in many cases to get information out of the man. So it's the kind of thrill of watching a Bond film or of watching an old Bond film is gone to a large extent. Goldfinger, I used to love, and I think there's a good reason that it is so highly regarded, which I guess we'll talk about later. But I do remember watching it. I don't know how many years ago, probably 10 years ago, or even more. And I thought, God, this film is so dated. And it was the first time that had ever crossed my mind about it. So, and that isn't a reason not to watch it, but oversaturation of it is. So no, I don't.
I can understand that. Like sometimes you need to take a step back and take a
Hmm.
break from it. And eventually, when you do revisit it, it gives it life again. I feel like it's one that I watch maybe once a year. The last time I watched an older Bond movie with my fiance, I wanted to get her opinion on it, and she picked
Hmm.
Goldfinger because it was the one she felt the most familiar with, and that She wanted something more along like a comfort line where she knew the movie. And I think we had watched it fairly recently because like Honor Blackman had passed and
Mm.
Tanya Mallet had passed and of course Connery. So I think that one has been seen a little bit more in this house. And I just it's got for me, it's got a lot of rewatchability. It's very fast paced compared to some other movies. There's not a lot that I find myself skipping to get to the next scene. So I feel like it's about every year it gets
Mhm.
on in some fashion. How much I pay attention or sit from beginning to end to watch is questionable, but where would you rank it, David, for you? Is it in the top, middle, or bottom of your favorites?
It's definitely in the top. I think the pre-title sequence is the pre-title sequence to beat. It is. I often say about the short stories that The Living Daylights is kind of the perfect Bond short story because it's an entire Bond adventure in short format. And I think the same is. You can say the same about the Goldfinger pre-title sequence too, because it's got just about everything there that you want from a Bond film. And you know, if Amazon decided to just do pre-title sequences, I'd be up for that. I think it would be great.
That would be something. Just every week, a 20-minute pre-title sequence.
Yeah.
How about you, Bill? Where does Goldfinger fall in your fandom?
It's definitely in the top part. I would also say, it may not be the best film of the series, but it's probably the most important.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And just for that reason, um, I have to watch it every so often because, it was probably one of the more outlandish Fleming novels. Odd Job with the hat and all that. And then, funny, The Golden Girl, as it was dubbed, which we see in the titles, and which was funny because in the novel, one hears about her death, but
Mm.
we never see it. And when the screenwriters were adapting it, that was like one of the first things they honed in on. It's like, we've got to show this. We've got to see her.
Yeah, because
See her die.
in the novel, Bond tells Goldfinger to arrange a train passage for them, and that he
Right.
wants,
Yeah.
I don't know, champagne and caviar in their cabin and stuff like that. So uh, it's very different there.
Yeah. So also, I think it is a case where a lot of the changes they made actually do make it better.
Yeah.
In the novel, he really was going to steal the gold, which, just by sheer volume and weight, it's just
Very
couldn't do.
impractical. Yeah.
So I don't want to say it's plausible, but it's a lot more plausible than what
Hmm.
Fleming had written.
Yeah, I think also it tapped into the Cold War paranoia as well by
Yes,
irradiating the gold.
right. And then there's that one bit in that one conversation that Bond has with Goldfinger the day before the raid, where he says, trying to do that would be risky, very risky. And then Goldfinger says, all on contrary, the risk is all on your side. If authorities do attempt to locate it, who knows where it might go off? And he lists a few possibilities, including the White House. But we are speculating idly. Operation Grand Slam will be successful.
For me, it falls in my top of like my Connery rankings. I mean, it battles it out with Thunderball, which is my favorite Connery movie. So it just kind of depends on my mood and what I'm looking for that day. It definitely has shortcomings for me, but it's also, like I said earlier, it's really rewatchable and it's fun. There's the first James Bond book about Bond that I got as a kid was The Incredible World of 007 by Lee Pfeiffer and Philip Lisa. That was kind of like my Bible when it came to the movies for a really long time. And that book cites Goldfinger as firmly establishing the Bond formula. Some of the traits of that include a spectacular pre-credit sequence, the main title sequence featuring erotic nudes seductively writhing to the sounds of a memorable title song performed by a well-known recording artist, Bond's arrival at the office, his flirtation with Moneypenny, deadly giftware from Q, orders from a stern-faced 007's involvement with a woman of dubious loyalty, a civilized duel of sorts between Bond and the main villain, a hulking henchman assigned to kill Bond, an elaborate high speed chase, a last minute death trap is set for Bond in the epilogue. 007 emerges victorious, and the film climaxes with 007 romancing the leading lady, often near a body of water. And that's just a handful of the traits that they listed. There are others, obviously. So, would you agree with that? Bill, do you think like Goldfinger is the one that set the template?
Largely, yes, because it always seemed, at least for a time, when they were kind of struggling for a direction, they went back to Goldfinger, and specifically with Diamonds Are Forever, because the box office of On Her Majesty's Secret Service, had a noticeable decline compared to the two previous ones, and they just got fixated. We got to have another Goldfinger. So they go out, they hired the same director as Goldfinger. They bring back Shirley Bassey to sing the title song.
Didn't they? Wasn't the one of the scripts Goldfinger's brother was the villain?
Yes, in fact, that idea actually came up twice. It came up during pre-production of On Her Majesty's Secret Service. It was Peter Hunt who kind of championed, like, no, 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 no. We've got a great novel. Let's just go with that. But that notion did come up during Majesty's, and then again in for Diamonds. I that was Maybaum's doing, Richard Maybaum, and I think maybe he was getting tired of hearing we got to have another Goldfinger. So like, okay, well, here you go.
Yeah. Do you know, just you saying that, Bill, it reminds me of how, with the recent films, they have tried to recapture um, the some of the elements of Skyfall unsuccessfully, because it just seems that because it was so successful, they think there's some magic to it, but they haven't been able to capture that.
Yeah, and I do think once the DB5 is shown in Goldfinger, it's like things were never ever going to be the same. From Russia with Love is, by comparison, is this, I won't say low key, but it's very much a Cold War thriller, even though they made Spectre the villains. But then that car, is it just changed the rule. And I'll get into this more when we talk about the script, but I was rereading one of my reference sources this morning, and it traces the development of the script. And like in the early drafts, first draft script was a DB5, but it was like the book. It had like reinforced bumpers. It had the Homer, but it didn't have machine guns and ejector seats and all that stuff. That came later in the development of the script. That car, at the time, that car at the time was just, people hadn't seen anything like it. So it just that and that car and the Golden Girl were like two icons of the movie that resonated with the audience.
Mm-hmm.
David, do you feel this film firmly established the formula that pretty much all the movies since then have followed?
Yeah, I think there's no question that it did. With Dr. No and From Russia with Love, they were finding their feet and then refining the formula with From Russia with Love. But I think with Goldfinger, they really nailed it, and that is exactly and that's exactly what they have tried to do. And Michael G. Wilson, admitted as much when they were filming Skyfall, and he was, saying that when they were filming in London, that it had a Goldfinger vibe, for example. And I don't think he's right. I don't think they managed to capture the Goldfinger vibe at all, other than the fact that it had an Aston Martin DB5 in it. But it is their reference point, and they frequently look back to it, and if they think that they've drifted too far from that formula.
There does seem to be something for most Bonds who get that far, that the third time is definitely the charm. Roger Moore with The Spy Who Loved Me, Daniel Craig with Skyfall, and you could probably, you could argue The World Is Not Enough in Pierce Brosnan, but there did seem to be something that they caught in this third movie that just made it that much. It just elevated the genre. So, given that formula they keep going back to, David, do you think this specific Goldfinger template this should be something they should go back to for Bond 26, or do we need to try something else entirely?
Well, um, I think that's a good question actually, and I think that if you stray too far from that template, then you are probably creating something which isn't Bond enough for established fans of the franchise. Moving on, it's not going to matter so much, but I think if they're going to retain fans, then it I think it can't stray too far.
Bill, how do you feel about it?
I think Bond 26 ought to take a lighter tone than the last couple. It would be actually, that's maybe a low bar, but the last couple have been pretty dour. I don't know, though, about trying to do it. I don't think they should try to check all the Goldfinger boxes, though.
Oh
I
no,
think
absolutely,
there's
yeah.
a happy medium in there because if you tried to duplicate Goldfinger, I think it'd be obvious. It would show, and there are elements of the movie that haven't aged well. So, I mean, if you did try to evoke it, do it in a subtle way. That's my thought.
Well, looking at this, checklist of sorts, there are so many things that I see on it that we got in Goldeneye. So, I mean, if you're looking at from a reboot standpoint, like musically, that's something totally different. But from the pre-credit sequence, the main titles, Bond going to the office, flirting with Moneypenny, like they put their own modern spin on those types of things.
Golden part of the book.
Yeah. Like there's so many familiar concepts between the two that it's that fine line that a Bond movie's gotta ride of giving you what you want because you expect it after 25 movies and then finding a new way of doing it and expressing it for modern audiences. Like it's an unenviable position that they find themselves in.
Well, for example, with Quantum of Solace, the agent Strawberry Fields gets killed. And this
Yeah.
movie overall has a very serious tone, but then they have her laying on the bed. She's, was drowned in oil instead of being painted gold, but she's has the exact same pose that Shirley Eaton had on the bed in Goldfinger.
Yeah, they did make a point of that
Yeah,
too.
it made no sense. It made no not that particularly painting a woman in gold paint makes all that much sense, but it made no sense to have her covered in gold in the middle of a hotel room, for one thing, and it was so bloody obvious that it just if you're going to do something like that, it needs to be really really subtle.
Well,
That was clubbing me over the head with it.
yeah.
It just it
One
just
thing
doesn't
about
have the
Goldfinger, though,
iconography, you know.
one thing about Goldfinger, though, and this is for us oldsters who remember this, younger fans won't recall this. Its impact was almost immediate.
Hmm.
And to give you an example, I mean, again, this is a United States example. There was this improbably popular situation comedy called The Beverly Hillbillies, which it ran for 9 years. Anyway, so Goldfinger was shown in the US in December of 64. And in the spring of 65, the Beverly Hillbillies, it's like one of the characters has gone to see Goldfinger. And he has found his life's work. I want to be double knot spy. And he goes home. He talks to his Uncle Jed. He gives a plot description. They never say the word Goldfinger, but you can tell from the plot description, the way this character describes the movie, and he's all excited. And his uncle, Jed Clampett, played by Buddy Ebsen, and he's taken all this in. He said, "Well, that's fine, boy, but why didn't they just shoot him?" And he's going, he becomes crestfallen. He can't figure it out. And by the end of the episode, he has converted their 1931 Oldsmobile truck to his spy car. He's got a metal tub. That'll be his bulletproof shield. He's got, rifles in the back, pull a string that they'd fire. He's got a barrel in the back to be his oil slick. And it's just, and he puts in an ejector seat. And that's the last gag of the episode, where the ejector seat gets. But again, they must have seen, the writers must have seen Goldfinger when it first came out. And to get it on the air just a few months later, they must have went to work on it right away.
Yeah.
And some of this became a running gag for several episodes, but the first one's just unbelievable.
I think we've got a couple more topics that I want to hit. But let's put a pin in this conversation right now, and let's come back and revisit this next week if you gentlemen are free. So before we close out, Bill, is there anything you want to promote before we sign off for tonight?
Well, I'll save this for next week. We can talk about the evolution of the Goldfinger script. It's I've got a book that goes into detail, so we'll talk about it next.
David?
Well, I am perfectly happy to talk Goldfinger, and more Goldfinger.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us today. This has been part 1 of our coverage of Goldfinger, License to Legacy. We will catch you all next week.